Can you tell the country, sir, why you are content with all the fanfare around this deal to leave the conscience of this nation and the strength of this nation unaccounted for in relation to these 4 Americans?
I got to give you credit, Major, for how you craft those questions. For the notion that I'm content as I celebrate with American citizens languishing in Iranian jails, Major, that's nonsense. And you should know better.
All right, Jay Sekulow, Chief Counsel of American Center for Law and Justice, aclj.org. Also the author of a great book, Undemocratic, How Unelected, Unaccountable Bureaucrats Are Stealing Your Liberty and Freedom, joins us. Jay, you know, the president then went on to explain how we couldn't talk about the prisoners because then they'd say, oh, the U.S. will have to make more concessions. Yet John Kerry comes out a day later and says every single time we sat down, we talked about the prisoners. So who's lying and who's telling the truth?
Well, I think what you've got is a situation where the administration doesn't want to acknowledge a huge failure. You have a bad deal with Iran that is only made worse by the fact that the 4 Americans are not released. So the situation, I think what Major Garrett did was put the president squarely in the hot seat on this issue. And of course the tragedy here is that these are the brothers, sons, fathers, husbands of American citizens that are detained in Iran. And it's not like just detained. These are in some of the worst prisons in the world. They've all been mistreated. We've heard the actual voice of Amir Hekmati talking about how he'd been beaten, talked about the fact that Amir knew that Saeed Abedini had been beaten as well. So this is a catastrophic failure on behalf of the administration, and frankly, if we were going to have any discussions with Iran, which was, I'll save that for another day, but the fact of the matter is, as a precondition, these Americans should have been released. This was a sign of American weakness. I think it sends a terrible signal to the rest of the country and to the rest of the world, frankly, that the president's willing to leave Americans behind in a situation like this. So very troubling. How you're sitting 9 feet away from the foreign minister of Iran and didn't arrange for the release of these Americans. I'll tell you what, I wouldn't hire John Kerry as my lawyer.
Yeah, well, I wish I knew which one was telling the truth. I got a feeling both of them are lying in some respect, the president and Kerry. And we've had Negma Abedini on the show repeatedly. We had her last week, and your heart breaks when you hear the story. And you know, his father, as you well know, has visited him in prison and could attest firsthand to the beatings he's had. Yeah,
you know, it was a conversation I did not want to have. I did an interview today with Nagme. And, you know, she's in the window. She's coming out of Boise. I was out of our studios. And the interviewer said, what's your reaction to this? I said, look, this is the conversation I never wanted to have. And that was after this horrible deal with Iran, we also still don't have the Americans released, specifically Saeed Abedini, who we represent. And it's a conversation I was praying and hoping would never happen. It has happened, which means we've got to really, and we are putting bipartisan pressure on the White House. The reason it's coming up every day, Steve, is because people like you are covering it. So Samantha Powers today at the United Nations has to bring up the 4 Americans because the pressure is mounting with Republicans and Democrats both speaking out on this. So we've got bipartisan support for the release of these Americans, and the White House is going to have to deliver, or I think there's a realistic chance that this entire deal, which probably should go down anyways, goes down in flames. And as I said, with 4 Americans left behind, it's really unconscionable.
Well, Jay, I was going to bring up Samantha Power, and we have the response from the Iranian ambassador who scolded her and the U.S., calling us basically imperialists, and how dare you bring up our human rights record when you invaded 2 countries. So that, to me, is very discouraging in thinking that they're going to release these people anytime soon.
Look, I don't get the luxury, Steve, and I understand it just looking at it. I don't get the luxury of being discouraged, because I've got to represent this family, and I've got to represent Saeed, and I've got to do everything we can institutionally at the ACLJ with our affiliates around the world to work on that release, whether it's in Washington, the United Nations, bilateral negotiations with other governments. You know, I have to be, in a sense, you got to be clinical about this. And when I say clinical, I mean it's an emotive issue, obviously, but I've got to look at this thing clinically. So I have to go to Plan B. We always have a Plan B. We're exercising that Plan B right now. Although Samantha Powers got, you know, basically laughed at by the Iranians, the fact that she said it was in a sense of victory here, because keeping it front and center is a big deal. A big part of this is keeping them front and center.
Is that your plan B? Yeah, is that plan B? I mean,
well, plan B goes a little deeper. Some things I can say, some things I can't. I will say this. We're working aggressively in Washington. We're working aggressively, let me just say, within the region where the situation is developed. We're working with other governments. We are not relying upon the State Department as our sole source to getting these Americans freed.
Gotcha.
By the way, it's the one-year anniversary today of the abduction of Jason Rezaian, the Washington Post reporter whose trial ended today.
Outrageous. Jay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Always good to talk to you. All right, folks, we're coming back with much, much more. Give me 5. Don't miss it. It's next.